Buenos días. Gracias por invitarme a FILU 2025. Estoy muy emocionada para hablar de mi tópico, de mi tema. Lo siento, voy a hacer toda mi presentación en inglés, pero quería hablar un poquito en español de la tema. Voy a hablar de terrorismo, pero voy a hablar sobre qué está pasando en la latino comunidad en los Estados Unidos, porque está afectándonos mucho ahí. Y creo que ya am, has visto muchas noticias sobre esto, que estamos deportando muchos y todo. Y la razón es que tenemos los carteles en un listo de grupos terroristas. Pero es un tema muy importante y creo que no hay mucha gente hablando de esto, pero está afectándonos mucho. Gracias. Okay. So as I said, I'll be speaking in English, and I apologize. It's just there's a lot of technical terms. But first, I wanted to begin with the fact that the part of the reason. Next slide, please. Um, Thank you. Perfect. I wanted to begin with the fact that in 2025, the U.S. invoked the Alien Enemies Act, and it was a law passed in 1798. And initially, it was so that the U.S. could deport people from countries with whom we were at war, and it was supposed to protect us. But unfortunately, now, as you probably know, it is being used against Latinos in the United States. Okay. And so that's a lot of what I want to talk about because of the fact that now, because cartels are on the terrorism watch list, we have now deemed many Latinos to be a national security threat. And so now we're no longer discussing whether or not somebody is a threat based on what they have done or if they are part of a group, but just based on their national origin. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, how did we get from drug cartels to national security threats? Well, as I said, the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation has been, cartels have been added to this list. Now, as you can see there on my slide, as of February 20th and then again in May 5th, many cartels in Mexico and in El Salvador were placed on this list. And basically, it just gives the U.S. extra powers, which can be good to actually face terrorist threats, but for other purposes, it may not always be the best. And I'll have to say at the outset, I don't agree that cartels are on the Foreign Terrorist Organization watch list. I don't believe that they are a terrorist organization. While they do have many characteristics in common, they don't have a political motivation for their actions. Obviously, they tend to be more geared towards making money, right? But as I said, by putting them on the FTO list, it activates a whole toolkit of legal and financial restrictions. And one of the most significant ways that it changes is the fact that it allows for people to be arrested and charged with material support. Next slide. And so this is actually a tool that we got post 9/11, and it allows the U.S. to charge people with material support of a terrorist organization. So what this means is that if a person donates money to a known terrorist organization, or if, let's say, a teenager in Detroit decides that he wants to go fight for ISIS and he travels to Syria to go fight for them. He is providing his body. He is providing material support to that terrorist organization, right? And so it's a great tool to have because you're cutting off a stream of funding, a stream of support to terrorist groups. But what this means for the fact that cartels are now on the terrorist watch list is the fact that now potentially Latinos who have families in cartels, maybe unknowingly, could potentially also be arrested and potentially deported as well. So this is extremely dangerous. And there are a few examples even before this time. For example, in one Supreme Court case, a U.S. nonprofit wanted to teach conflict resolution to a terrorist group. It wasn't violence. They just wanted to show them how to come about with a peaceful solution. But even that counted as support. My scenario regarding teenagers who wanted to go fight for ISIS is also very real, although there was some argument about whether or not that might be entrapment because on the other side of that was police officers who were helping them try to get to Syria, and they were actually cut off before they even got on the flight themselves. So, family ties, donating money to organizations, or even giving money to family to help them out. And we do know that there are a lot of cross-border familial ties and people giving money back and forth. So this is a very real issue that I don't think is discussed enough. And it's also the fact that the law doesn't require intent. It doesn't matter if you know or don't know whether or not your family is in a cartel or in a terrorist organization. All that matters is the fact that there is this tie. Next slide, please. And so, of course, this is where it does get personal, right? So these laws don't just impact foreign actors. Okay, they're being used to cast suspicion on entire communities. Well, what does this look like in practice? Well, if you aren't aware, there are quite a few migrant populations who are in the U.S., obviously. There are a lot of them fleeing violence. And now, instead of being seen as victims, they're being seen as suspects. And so even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, even if you don't have a criminal record, they can arrest you. On the slide before, I had Kilmar Abreu Garcia, who was on there, and he's probably the most famous case that's come out. A lot of people are fighting for him at the moment because he was a law-abiding immigrant. He had an American wife, and I believe he was a green card holder, but he was arrested and deported and sent to El Salvador to the very notorious terrorism confinement center. Since then, the Trump administration has tried to cast doubt on whether or not he is a part of a cartel, but everything legitimate that has come out has said he is not part of one. And so they are trying to get him to come back, but it's quite difficult. But as I said, his attorneys and family vehemently deny that he is part of MS-13. And so just like him, there are other businesses who are run by people with family in Mexico who might be flagged, even humanitarian organizations. And actually just saw last night another news article about an American citizen who was born in, I think, Missouri or something like that. And he was arrested. He even showed his ID, but he was arrested and luckily he was eventually let out. But even with proper identification, they're still arresting even citizens, but because he was Hispanic. Next slide. All right, but we have seen this before, right? So, after 9/11, obviously Muslims were also looked at very suspiciously. Muslims and South Asians. In fact, there was even a shooting against Sikhs where they were killed because they were mistaken for Muslims. Okay, so these same tools are still being used based on just suspicion alone, and they're being redirected towards Latino communities, especially those that are near the US-Mexico border. And of course, the language and legal structure remain the same. And unfortunately, only the target has changed, right? So there have been recent enforcement actions which underscore this shift. As I said, even an American who was arrested in my own city in Philadelphia, a car wash was raided, and I think they caught 6 to 8 people there. In Kern County, a series of immigration raids known as Operation Return to Sender led to the detention of numerous Latino farm workers. And there are quite a few other farms and dairies that are also finding that they just can no longer uh, operate because of the fact that so many people are just afraid to come to work. And so there are very real life consequences um, beyond the fact that people are being detained, right? Because basically this enforcement strategies are instilling fear in these communities, leading to decreased school attendance. In fact, I have a sister that is a school counselor, and she says that there are many kids that are not coming to school any longer because their parents are afraid that they will get caught by La Migra. Um, and you also have a lot of obviously workers who are not showing up for work anymore as well. All right. And so the broad application of national security rhetoric to immigration enforcement has effectively criminalized an entire community based just on ethnicity and perceived association. Next slide, please. And so the culture of suspicion is also reinforced through superficial indicators. You have a picture here of a tattoo, which is increasingly being misinterpreted as signs of gang or terrorist ties now. And so they are using any of this as evidence in their sometimes court proceedings. Unfortunately, right now, there's not a lot of due process. So they're lucky if they even get the court proceedings. But it is being misused because a lot of the US immigration authorities are relying on these tattoo markings. And obviously, tattoos have become increasingly popular with many populations, but especially in the United States. And so sometimes something as vague as a letter or a stylized design is used to justify detention or denial of asylum or even deportation. All right. And a lot of these are also flagged just by law enforcement who see a tattoo and then saying that this is a terrorist organization tattoo. And obviously, a lot of young migrants are coming to the United States with tattoos already because it is a form of personal or artistic expression. I mean, we see them everywhere. And there are documented cases where deported people have tattoos of their kids' names on their arms, or even tattoos that have just been misidentified in the DHS database. And so it's really at this point guilt by association or just guilt by appearance alone, unfortunately. And so when this counterterrorism logic is applied broadly, even someone's skin is becoming a risk indicator. And once it's flagged, it's incredibly difficult to prove innocence. And again, that's if they can't even prove innocence because of the fact that they're not following through with due process at the moment. Next slide, please. And then there's an interesting fact that it's not just humans that are making these decisions anymore. US immigration authorities right now are relying on automated surveillance that are flagging people for deportation, not based on what they've done, but more based on who they know, where they're from, or how they move. And so these systems are pulling from webs of databases, social media, biometrics, and even travel history. to generate what amounts to basically a risk profile. The problem is that obviously technology is often opaque. It's very error prone, and it can be very unregulated. And so people are flagged without knowing why, and they're rarely told what data was used against them. And this is also what happened post 9/11 with many people's names who sounded particularly South Asian or Middle Eastern. But even more troubling, these systems often reflect the biases of the people who made them, right? And so the biases are already embedded in the data itself. So over policing in Latino neighborhoods, surveillance of immigrant communities, or flawed intelligence about family or regional associations are going to be included in there. And so basically now we've automated suspicion at this point, and so now a machine gets to decide whether you deserve rights or not. Next slide, please. And of course, this leads to a lot of economic fallout, right? These legal and technological changes ripple outward. The fear they produce is very real. As I said, we have a lot of people who are no longer going to schools, no longer going to work, but even businesses themselves are no longer opening. And so the consequences go beyond individuals, but into the communities themselves. Because now we have entire communities that feel targeted. Businesses are shutting down and people are no longer using services, right? And if you think you're going to be caught by the police, you're not going to report crimes to them anymore. You're no longer going to act as a witness to a crime either, all of which we've had issues already for immigrants, but now it's going to be magnified, right? And studies have shown that these enforcement patterns do lead to economic downturns, also to mistrust in institutions and social fragmentations in Latino communities across the US. As you can see in my slide here, this is a 2025 recent article in El País, which shows that Latino-owned businesses across the US are collapsing under the fear of mass deportations, with one owner saying, "What is happening now is worse than what we experienced during COVID." Next slide, please. All right. So again, as I said, the consequences go beyond um, beyond beyond the immediate people themselves, right? And especially for, you know, you don't realize it, but children themselves, right? They are growing up in a climate of fear, afraid that their parents could very well disappear. So we're not even thinking about the trauma that they're going to have for probably the rest of their life, right? People are avoiding libraries, the church, courthouses. Actually, an article, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, did discuss the fact that now that is a new way to catch people is by catching them in the courthouses when they are there for legal reasons, right? And obviously, legal rights exist on paper, but in practice, people are too afraid to claim them. Okay, and so the damage is both economic and social, and as I said, we have a greater distrust not only in institutions but also among community members themselves, afraid that somebody's going to maybe call the police on them as well. Okay. And so this trauma could very well be generational. Next slide, please. And so if it does feel similar, as I said, it is similar, not only to post 9/11, but even after World War I, there was a fear of anarchist violence, which led to the Palmer raids, where thousands of immigrants, mostly Italian and Eastern European, were detained. They were deported without trial. And under what justification? Well, national security. Okay. Again, after 9/11, we enacted the Patriot Act, and if you don't realize, that passed very quickly, less than 30 days, I believe. Um, and in that one, they had sweeping surveillance, secret evidence, indefinite detention, which we're still dealing with today. And of course, in that one, the targets were Muslims, Arabs, and South Asians. And again, not because of what they had done, but because of who they were perceived to be. And so now, in response to cartel violence, we're seeing that some national security logic, that same national security logic being applied to Latino communities, with proposals to designate many cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, which has already happened. And that triggers a host of laws originally intended just for enemies of the state. So each time the response is justified as basically urgent and necessary because again we can claim national security, right? But instead it results to an erosion of civil liberties, the expansion of unchecked state power, and disproportionate harm to a lot of the marginalized communities. And of course, once these powers are granted, they're pretty rarely rolled back. Luckily, with the Patriot Act, it has slowly been rolled back, but a lot of powers that were given during the Patriot Act are still there. Next slide, please. And so these aren't just unfortunate side effects. These are the result of choices embedded in our laws and a lot of assumptions. And if we're not careful, they're going to become the norm. And so this isn't just about legal designations, it's about the deeper assumptions that shape law enforcement. It's about who we see as a threat and who we allow the system to protect, right? Who gets stopped at the border. And again, if you're watching the news, you might see that, yes, indeed, there are many people who probably have browner skin, have Hispanic sounding names that are being stopped at the border. That said, it is also happening to other people. There are many news articles now about it happening to Canadians and Europeans alike. So it's not stopping with just Latinos. And who gets the benefit of the doubt, right? Who gets labeled dangerous for simply existing in the wrong place, speaking the wrong language, or having the wrong last name, right? Right now, it's Latino communities, especially Mexican and Central American, who are at the highest risk of being swept up. But who knows about the next iteration of this? And again, we're not talking about people who are engaged in crimes or engaged in violence. We're talking about workers. We're talking about students. We're talking about parents. We're talking about neighbors, people who are helping our communities thrive. And I say our by American, by in the United States. And unfortunately, if we don't challenge this now, we risk normalizing a future where national security becomes a pretext for racialized profiling, policing, and where fear trumps justice. And because history has shown us, it never stops with just one group, right? Once that machinery is built, it keeps expanding. And so eventually it becomes, well, who's next? What's next? Next slide, please. And so these policies are not abstract, they affect real people. Kilmar is just one of the many people who have been deported unlawfully. They affect families, they affect workers, they affect neighbors, they even affect many business owners as well, right? So we need to ask ourselves some tough questions. Who benefits from this approach and who is harmed? And if this sounds familiar, it's because we've seen this before, right? Let's not wait until the damage is done to speak up. Thank you, and I welcome any questions. Gracias.
Hola, Carla.
Hola.
Muchas gracias por tu ponencia. There is one question that I would like to ask you. It's there has been a lot of noise around the term terrorism here in Mexico about what it means. So, in the short term, what would be the effect in terms of the relationship between security offices, for example? What it means to deal not with crime organizations, to deal with terrorism, because I guess in the case of Mexico, we're not very used to the word.
Yeah, I mean, again, the biggest issue has definitely been the material support. But the other issue is the fact that with this designation, we could potentially send in troops. Luckily, I think we have a good enough relationship that we wouldn't do that. I know I did see another news article about Trump offering to send in the military, and President Scheinbaum said, no, thank you, which is great. But we don't know how he's going to act. I think he's a little bit of a wild card for everybody. Um, but I think a big issue is that it could potentially um, lead to no longer sharing information, which would be terrible, right? I think as of right now, I know I saw another news article about the fact that now we are um, sending in drones and doing a little bit of surveillance in order to help and tell the Mexican government where certain cartel leaders are. And right now it is stopping there, which is great. But it could potentially lead to icing out of other people. In other words, if we don't have good information sharing, then obviously we're going to continue to have more people crossing the borders illegally. And I think for you guys, it's also a concern, obviously, because a lot of arms shipments are coming in illegally as well. And so I think that's more the bigger issue. Like I said, luckily, putting the cartels on the FTO list is supposed to lead to more powers for us. Um, we haven't realized them yet, thankfully.
Thank you, Carla. My question is, where do you see this thing going 5 to 10 years from now?
Uh, I don't know. It's hard because I think it's gonna take a really long time to recover. And obviously a lot of it is gonna depend on who the next president is, um, and what we do with these powers. As I said, post 9/11, during the Patriot Act, we enacted a lot of new powers just based on fear. Luckily, over the next 10 to 15 years, we have rolled back some of them, but we do still have a lot of those same powers. And so it's going to depend on whether or not the next president also believes that cartels should stay on the FTO list. Um, it's also, I think, going to be driven a lot by our population and whether or not we see the value in our own immigrant communities. If they become decimated because we no longer have them in our communities, then I think, obviously, the next president could have more help in keeping them or attracting them back to the United States. But as of right now, um, I know there are people who are voluntarily leaving the United States, even obviously Americans. Um, but it's it's so hard because I don't think any of us could have predicted just how far this would go 5, 10 years ago. And it's really sad because I think even people who voted for Trump are starting to realize, oh, you mean you're not going to just deport criminals? You're actually deporting whole communities of Latinos. And I was mistaken. I didn't know that was going to happen. So, you know, like I said, even the people who voted for him, I think others might have said they could have seen this coming, but um, but for the next 4 years, I think we're all on edge waiting to see what's going to happen.
Gracias. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My question is more about the flow, the speed, the fast times that is happening this now. This was part of my question is this was part of the first administration of Trump, or is is something that he left pendant and now is going to instill these surveillance systems based on technology, basically. So why is happening so fast? Is something linked to the culture, to the tradition, to all these arguments that have been happening between parties, between societies,
Yeah.
communities?
Yeah, I think what's happening is that Trump is taking advantage of a system that he learned during his first term, right? So he realized where he went wrong the first time, and realized that just by kind of bullying his way into the system, he can enact changes, even just temporarily until the courts stop him, right? So he's made many executive orders, but it takes time for our legal system, in our legal system, to go through the proper legal channels, and he is taking advantage of that, right? So, or just flat out ignoring courts, right? They've said he needs to bring back Kilmar Garcia, and he just said, no, I can't anymore, right? And so I do think that he just learned a lot of lessons from his first term, and obviously not just him, but the people working for him. And I don't think they care about any repercussions at this point. They've realized that they can commit crimes and there is no punishment for it. So why not just do what I want to do? And so, yeah, he's taking advantage of the fact that our legal system is quite slow to respond to this, and there's no immediate way. Even impeachment, right? Even if we were to impeach him, that takes a long time as well. So, so yeah, he learned lessons from his first 4 years is what happened. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I apologize that I could not do the whole presentation in Spanish, but I hope you were able to at least catch some of that. Um, and I really am very thankful for my time here in Mexico. I think this is a beautiful country, and I really hope that I get to continue to see more of it. And please make sure that you consider and pray for the families that are going through this in the United States at the moment. It really is a tough time for many of us. I am Latina as well, to be in the United States at the moment. So thank you so much.